Now, supposedly I'm muted.
That has been fixed. I'm a professional.
You are a professional. Okay, ladies and gentlemen, let's get on this roller coaster ride. I'm gonna take Derek. I'm gonna put him aside for a second. We're gonna bring out MacabreDerek here for a second. So, I want you to lean in here, okay? Because earlier somebody ended up asking, where do we find the horror in this scenario? And if you've read this scenario, we can have a lot of fun with this. So, the first thing you need to end up putting to the side, okay? This is not about monsters, okay? The monsters make it weird, make it exciting. The fact that we have eldritch gods physically manifest and people are openly worshipping them, and this is a norm, is strange, but it's more of the fantasy-esque strange. The question of horror in this regard, in this one, is conspiracy. The conspiracy is, who do you trust? If you take a closer look at the scenario, everyone is in on it. It's the most well-known secret. It's these blotches that are starting to end up getting just a little bit aggressive. Like, what is happening to our god? We're supposed to take care of it, and yet these blotches are coming out. But the god tiers just feel so damn good. That's what we're about. That's that wonderful bit where we end up taking in the god tiers, and for a second there, we can commune. If we do it right, we can taste God. The Mother Father has given us a blessing, and this little piece of their child showing our favor. And you might even find somebody who is this deranged, who just happens to end up thinking that this gift from other gods is something that they imbue, that they can force upon this god to give it more power. What they don't realize is, because how could you fathom this, that a god can actually become addicted? Because that's what we're dealing with. This is a horror of addiction. This is taking a moment where, oh dear God, it can reach out and say, give me more. I need more. And in those moments of clarity, it realizes what is happening to it, but it doesn't have a choice anymore. No, because the person in charge right now, who is supposed to be devout to it, has realizing that their own power is increasing by feeding it its fix. That the priest has become a peddler of corpses laced with wonderful.
Uh-oh. Hang on. I think there's been maybe the elder gods know that we're onto their secrets here, but unfortunately, it seems like the connection is frozen. Although I'll tell you, Derek, you have a magnificent face frozen on screen right now. Um. Oh, all right. We're
We
back.
are going.
We're
We are
back.
going.
I saw you exhale. All right, we're back to it.
All right. See, this is where the horror comes from. Okay, and if you don't think that that's horrifying, deal with somebody who is on methamphetamine for a while. Deal with somebody who is addicted to crack cocaine. This is a drug that destroys families. We are talking about an analog for these exact ones, and maybe not even an analog. These things may still exist. The chemicals have not changed. What we just took is this and brought it to a god level, a spiritual level. And the fact that this is in a world that has normalized this kind of worship but doesn't understand what it's doing, that is where we find the horror. It is not in the thing that goes bump in the night. Much like vampire, the horror is not, and I repeat, it is not in the fact you drink blood. The horror comes from you losing yourself. Guess what? We can do the same thing with drugs in this case, except it's not us losing ourselves. It's our God losing themselves to this drug that we've been exposing it to. And the fact that human nature does not change. That is a big thing. You were talking about human beings that have shifted only in form, in societal change. But ultimately, human is still human, is still human. It doesn't matter if you have a second eyelid and you can end up holding your breath for 20 seconds. It doesn't matter if you can tap into the chaos and be able to change the world around you. That does not matter. The thing that matters is the decisions made around you. You were caught in a conspiracy. Here's the question earlier on. Can we end up calling the feds? Sure, you could, but how do you get a hold of the Federal Bureau of Investigation? You know, more often than not, people have to go through the police. Well, guess what? The police probably have a few of the faithful on them. And guess what? Can you turn to those who worship the very person? Because that's really what they're doing. They follow this individual because he is the voice of the divine, the Mother Father. Where do you turn? How do you know which classmates are still clean? You yourself have been imbibing and selling these drugs. Your hands are already dirty because you think you haven't sold something that eventually tainted the very God that you once worshipped? That you have assisted in the dismembering of its own mind and soul just because you needed to make a quick buck? Are your hands any cleaner than that of the pastor who had thrown you out of the town in the first place? You start to look at this and you have to start looking at yourself. This is where the horror lies. Because you realize what you are. And now, you got to take a look. One of the NPCs, what does he do? He communes with a god. And one of the things he could try and do is make a new religion. He is going to continue the cycle that caused this in the first place. He is going to become a monster by repeating that of which is trying to kill him now. We end up getting in this position with a god who in its moment of clarity realizes how addled it's becoming and wants to die. I want you to think about that. A god that wants to die as what is effectively in its fetal stage. It is still in an embryonic state. And what happens when you abandon it? You say, not my problem. Maybe you sneak out of the town. Maybe you find some way to escape the people that are currently hunting you. The police, you manage to get past the borders, you try and jump by. Well, guess what? That God that you allowed to be birthed into this world, that you have assisted, indirectly or directly, into feeding it more drug-addled corpses, whether you made them by your own hand or not, the fact that you are involved and you have dumped it off, you have left everyone to die. This is going to become a natural consequence of this. This is the moral weight here and here, in your head and in your heart. The horror is coming to grips with this. And if you take a look, none of these PCs, none of their hands are clean. They try and be righteous. They try and be studious. They try and be stalwart. But each and every one of them, guilty. You're guilty. That is ultimately what you've become involved in. The horror is not the monster that you may have tried to gain lucky with in a houseboat. The monster is the events that are spiraling out of control that you have become a part of. And depending on how good you are at it, you might orchestrate again, starting a cycle that will continue. The next embryo that is a gift from the mother father, what do you think you're going to end up doing with it when Zep finally ends up making that new religion, that new following to build the more of the faithful? Where is all this going to end up? You might be skulking about somewhere in the depth. You might be able to end up finding just those minutes where you can catch your breath, but ultimately you will be hunted. You will be tracked, and you will be looking into secrets that this town has been trying to keep buried. You're going to end up in mortuaries and realize what has happened. Now, if you're a really good ST, you're going to start bringing in old family members. There's going to be small mentions. Guess what? Your grandmother, well, you haven't been the same since. Well, guess what? There's a high likelihood, just as this cat is on my shoulder, that your grandma got fed. And I can guarantee you that corpse was laced with something. Maybe it was something you started experimenting with in high school. Probably got it from the same dealer. Oh, wait, we remember what happened to him, didn't we? Too many shots of the good stuff and fed. That is your fate, because guess what? That's what this preacher wants to do to you. Try and imagine what might happen, knowing full well that you will be tied down, injected, smoked, force-fed, all kinds of wonders. You will be drooling at the mouth as your heart starts to beat, trying to catch up. Your pupils dilated as you start to see in technicolor, as you kind of taste that little bit of copper on the tip of your tongue, and you realize the reason is because you've been trying to vomit up your own blood out of your lungs, but you can't, because this is how you overdose, drowning in your own vomit, knowing that this is the best and worst high you will ever have before what's left of you is fed to a thirsting god and your memory made as a cautionary tale. This is what you're up against, and you're telling me there's no horror with monsters being normal? I might beg to differ.
Well, um, yeah, that's, I mean, that is an excellent addressing of how can you find horror in a game that's about monsters and magic and eldritch gods being, no more uncommon than going through the Bible Belt on a Sunday morning, seeing people dressed up, going to church and picnics and all that other stuff, where your high school sweetheart is a gorgon. Where's the horror in that? Because I think for many of us, and Derek, this is why I'm so glad to have been able to meet you on this platform. I've been so glad to have gotten to know you and to see your experience and your reputation in action, because this was a sticking point for me and I think for many others, and that's why we're having this conversation, because there are so many who are going to get caught up and say, I love the horror, I was brought in by the art, by the big, god killers. And then when you read into it, especially if you are coming from a D&D background, or even, I would say, folks who do play vampire, but we are caught up on drinking blood, and drinking blood is scary, which it can be. But where is the horror? Not the thrill, not the what's kind of the jump scare, the scary. How do you find horror in a world like this? Because we're drawn in by it, by that macabre, by that macabreness that we're getting from all the content. And so how could you go about this? And it looks like so as Evelyn said, he understands. Emmy has chills, and apparently, Derek, J-Man might be interested in you running God Killers.
Well, that's a thought. Let me get Derek back on the phone here.
Yes.
Okay, so actually, here's the irony. J-Man, you might remember when we first met, I once ended up saying I am a horror ST. I'm a horror GM. I'm glad you finally got a chance to witness what I do. that is what I do. That's the kind of games I run, right? And the horror, the best kind of horror is when you look at yourself in the mirror, right? And you kind of need to drag that. Oh dear God, somebody got that clipped. I'm gonna have to end up viewing that clip in a second. Now let me just inexpensive. Yeah. Oh God, I'm kind of curious now. Derek, MacabreDerek being MacabreDerek. Yep, that's about right. Okay, so here's the thing that when it comes down to horror, you need to understand is when you are talking about the fantastic being the norm, there are certain inalienable truths that will follow, right? A houseboat is a houseboat. Drug addiction is still drug addiction.
Yeah.
The crisis of faith is still the crisis of faith. These are, just because you're no longer human, right? Just because you're no longer like we are. I'm not amphibious. I don't have a lizard's tail. I don't have horns coming out of my head. But I can understand the concept of somebody being addicted. I mean, hell, you've been seeing me service my own addiction this entire time, right? We are talking about the need for faith, the need that this can be better. We talk about the crisis of faith, the loss of faith. We are talking about these human experiences. And that's where horror comes from. Horror doesn't come from the eyes falling out. Horror comes from the shared experience, something we know. We know this. But to express it in that visceral tone, to express it with that intensity and that emotional severity that the topic deserves, that's a whole nother level.
I completely agree. I mean, I'm not sitting here silent because I don't understand. I very much do, and I hope that for the rest of you out there who do have an interest in running horror. Obviously, we're here talking about the human or the post-human condition, which is the role-playing game, and God Killers is this intro story to it. I hope that if you play in this world, and particularly with this opening story, that what we've discussed is definitely more than what you're going to find in a demo. Derek has given his time here to be here to share his experiences, his hard-won experiences, his ups, downs, all arounds that he has learned by developing this understanding of this very primal part of all of us, which in its own interesting way is something that can bond us together. That's something that can actually bring humanity closer together, are these great fears, because we all can understand fear and we can all be the same. Even if we're a gorgon or a frog person or whatever, we can still fear what's outside our houseboat rattling it and bring us that much closer.
I think one thing I wanted to end up, Flora ended up saying, that's more sick, nausea, disgusting, but not afraid. Fear, horror, and terror are three completely separate emotions. Revulsion is a category of horror that, no, I do not want to pull away. Fear can be that fight or flight response, right? Terror is that not being able to get out of your own box, but knowing you have to. It's terror can be akin to hopelessness in that regard, right? Horror is a realization. At the end of the day, all horror can be boiled down to a realization. The best of horror comes down to the realization of self. This is one of the things that I love about Vampire the Masquerade, because this is what makes the game so horrific, is that ultimately, despite the fact that the dice went south on you, you were the one to choose to give this an opportunity to come out. You didn't go about it the safe way. You took a risk, and you put yourself or somebody else's life in danger for just that little bit of blood. And when you come to realize that, oh, it wasn't me, it was the beast. Well, no, it was you. You were the one who chose to put somebody in range of the beast to get their throat ripped out, right? Guess what? Not much different in God Killers. You are talking about something where somebody has started to poison a god with addictive drugs. Stuff that is stolen and sold on the black market, right? You got involved in this, and now you have to reap some of the consequences of that. Because ultimately, the more you dig into this, the more you realize that the PCs are not innocent. Not at all in this. And the stuff that they're going to have to do, right? And if you're a really good hit, ST, you'll be able to end up making sure that those tie in real close. It's an amazing gut check. Fear the unknown. If we know everything that can happen, then, okay, it becomes normal and ordinary. Yes, that's true. Fear can be of the unknown. That is one of the things to be afraid of. However, certainty can also be a fear. So, for instance, a cheetah trying to chase you down when you're a zebra. There are some definite knowns there. You know what it's doing. You know what you need to do, because I can guarantee you, no matter how hard you can kick, that thing is going to tear you to shreds. And you know what the outcome's going to be if you don't run. The fear comes down not in when it bites down on your neck to crush your larynx and start to eat you while you are still trying to gasp for air. The fear comes from when it's charging at you, knowing its intent. And that is what this prophet is. That's what it is. This prophet, this reverend, is fear. He is a reason to be afraid, because he has the power, he has the influence, he has the divine word. And especially in communities like what's being described, a religious leader is more powerful than a chief of police, is more powerful than a mayor, is more powerful than a secretary, and in some cases, depending on the community, more powerful than the National Guard. And he wants you. He wants you drug-addled and dead and eaten. That is his end goal for you. And the more you get involved, worse it gets. If this happens daily, here's the thing. Everybody else is because it reads, if you actually read the front, it says people offer themselves up. That's how it's normally done. And the game is actually quite explicit on what is normally done in that regard. You need to express it. So in fact, I would actually rewind it back. I wouldn't set the first scene at the houseboat. I would set the first scene or maybe the prelude in a time where everybody is around the embryo, and there is a moment where you are actually watching somebody who is openly committing suicide to offer themselves. And the thing is while this is frowned upon, what are you going to do? Who are you going to charge? Right? That's the loophole that they've been using, is the fact that the person you would charge for this is ultimately already dead and eaten. What are you going to do to them? You expect that. What you don't know, and this comes down to, again, what do you make normal, right? And this is how you present it, right? The idea that people who die of natural causes or drug overdoses aren't normally fed to this thing. No one's aware that this god is being fed drugs the whole time. It's expected to be fed pure human flesh. Okay? Human flesh that was offered willingly in sacrifice to what they believe is a greater good. That they will become one with this child of the mother father. That this is a holy thing. And it should be, and again, as an ST, you treat it as something sacred, as something beautiful. Describe it as devout, true faith. In this day and age, praying to something that's true faith, whether you believe or not, can oftentimes be a very beautiful thing. And in its opposing extreme, a very horrific thing. And here's the big thing when it comes down to God killers as itself, is the fact that I can see this relying more on real world horror. And when I say real world horror, it doesn't matter how messed up your eldritch stuff gets. It doesn't matter how big and bad your monsters are. It doesn't matter what you do to the soul. It will never be more terrifying than stuff like school shootings. It will never be more terrifying than things like car bombings. Real world terrifying things that we hear about all the time, and we kind of desensitize ourselves until it happens in front of us.
And that's because it's close to us as the players, and as the players we're the controllers of the characters. And if we're afraid of something, right, because of how the proximity, that's what you're getting. It's uncomfortably close to us. It invokes things that well, you know, I'll give our Tuesday game a little bit of an advertisement here, you know, J-Man. So let me take that to the side real quick. When Coffee Cat was under the spotlight on Tuesday, and those were tears. That was like the sound of, you could hear that. You heard that kind of warble in the voice. That was close. Now this is a made up tiefling character that one of our players is running, but you know what? I think that was real. Like something touched close. Whatever it was, I don't even need to wonder. Whatever it is, but something somewhere was so close to the player that it was so real, despite the veneer of a tiefling bard, a very beautiful blue tiefling bard, mind you.
He is a beautiful man, and we have some lewds going around.
Yeah.
But here's the thing I want to address, because the one person who's not sold on this, and Flora is probably the best example of the kind of attitude I'm afraid will present because of the way the book was laid out. Okay? Because the book almost...
Yes, I understand.
The exact same path. Because I was expecting eldritch horror, right? I was expecting monsters in the dark. I was expecting this kind of thing. But that's not at the crux of Godslayer or God Killers. It's not there, because that's not the core of it, right? Now, because we've done this bit of a deep dive into what we're actually handling, what is actually in our hands, right? Brings up a perfect example, right? And I'm going to read this just for everybody who didn't quite catch the comment. In this world, you are afraid to be normal than a monster, for the fear of being driven away by society by being normal. No. No. The fear unto itself is what you will be exposed to. Because these are still humans, right? Monstrous is still monstrous, right? Flirtation is still flirtation, as you're going to learn with a wonderful little Medusa, which is hands down my favorite character introduction ever. It's like, I'm doing what now? I love that. But in the face of it, right, they're talking about sacrifice as a beautiful thing, as a religious experience. Murder is not the norm here, okay? Thievery is not the norm. This is small town USA. That's what this is. It's just that everybody happens to look a little weird, right? You happen to have these big orange eyes that have a second eyelid. People are more accustomed to river travel. Yes, we still have trucks, right? But I would suspect that having trucks would be a very rare privilege because they're concerned about the clarity of the water. I would suspect that...
Oh, yeah, they're green. Like, environmental preservation is a big part of their faith. They pick up litter. They recycle.
Yeah. You run into this, right? And you start figuring out, like, well, there's certain little things. The post-human condition simply means that you may no longer be human, but it said right in the introduction, these things still hold true. Greed, love, sadness, despair, hope. These things are still there, right? And that's exactly it, right? And that's something about the presentation, right? That may require a little bit more work. It may, because the images invoke some real beautiful and horrific stuff, right? This, especially with chaos being magic, right? But it's the society that they're in, that who's in power, what's actually happening. This is still very much human. And bluntly, I mean, one of the touchstones of horror is nothing will ever be scarier to a human being than another human being. We could talk about a comet coming to kill us, but that'll be over quick. A human being, regardless on whether they have that second set of eyelids, horns, or anything else, is still a human being and is capable of great acts of kindness and generosity, as well as great sadism, as well as great greed.
Yes.
This is ultimately the tone I believe this game is trying to do. Now, Maddie, I have about an hour left with you. Now, remember I told you we would go back to the mechanics?
Yes.
Well, we needed to do this deep dive because now we know what we're looking at, right? Now we know.
Yeah, I think we've identified what this is trying to achieve, that there is eldritch horror, but it's not as we know it through popular culture or exposure to I guess traditional eldritch horror. It sounds a little oxymoronic.
Yeah. Well, here's the thing, right? Horror unto itself is emotional. It's not rational. You can try and make it rational, and I've done this several times, okay? Unless you can emotionally engage a person in a role-playing game when it comes down to horror, it doesn't matter how bad it gets. So I can describe something gruesome to you in very vivid detail. But if I do this in a very monotone voice, very matter of fact, the cranium has been here, split in two, seeming to end up causing a wound down the back of the spine. Spinal fluids have started here leaking out, and it would appear that the brain is now exposed to open air. There's nothing there. There's nothing. That's
Yeah, I mean,
anecdotal.
you're reading a medical report. It's detached. It's a list of things. You're not in. It's just they're things. It's not evoking something.
Yeah, yeah. And this is on the way to the storyteller. This is nothing the game can do.
Yeah, yeah.
Okay? So we need to look at what does the game do.
So we want to take it back. Maybe take another 5-minute break or so, and then when we come back, do you want to bring it back to the mechanics and the things we were talking about originally, or is that?
You. I'm ready to go. I still have half a juice of water, and I switch batteries to make sure that I can end up going for hours on end if I have to.
I think we can bring it back around. I don't want to go too late because I do know that you need to get going, and I want to make sure that we've. I want to make sure we're giving people ideas. We're planting those seeds and expectations, and we're causing folks to ask questions or come to realizations. But I still want to. I want to preserve a little bit of the mystery. Like, we didn't get into the complete telling of the story because I want people to read that based, themselves. And especially if they've seen this and heard this, they can add their own presentation like you're talking about. So they're not sounding like I'm reading. I'm reading or paraphrasing from the following box text, as you see in Dungeons and Dragons adventures.
Yeah, I want to say one thing, though. To Journeyman, where he ends up responding that everybody and their mother has done H.P. Lovecraft's story with the fishing town. And you're right, but here's the thing. Much like a joke that everybody's heard, it's not the joke. It's the presentation. You can do the most bog standard illustration as far as composition and all that, but if it's done well, it'll still strike you. You can do a very predictable story, but if it's said with the degree of intensity and with that emotional gravitas that it was initially trying to invoke, it will still draw you. So here, it is not the recipe, it's the chef.
Ooh, I like that. All right, well then, yeah, let's take another 5-minute break. Get up, stretch our legs, refresh ourselves, and I think we'll come back and we're on the home stretch. We'll bring this home, and I think we'll examine. We'll have given this a fair shake. We'll have talked about its strengths. We'll talk about we've talked about its shortcomings, and we can revisit where we began along this journey, and see if we've found a new layer or a new appreciation or a new way to consider what this is, because this isn't what perhaps many of us thought it was. But now that we understand it, we can look at it again. Okay, so 5 minutes and we'll be back.
All right.